long before the first human eyes turned upward and traced the faint red star drifting across the night. Before the earliest myths gave names to constellations, Mars had already grown old. Now it circles the sun as a husk of a world, its deserts rusting beneath a thin and brittle sky. The surface is wind-scoured, barren, marked by canyons so vast they seem to split the planet's memory open. To the telescopes and rovers we send, it appears empty, a graveyard of rock and dust. But what if this silence is not the mark of a world that has always been dead, but of one that once spoke, and has simply forgotten how? Imagine Mars not as we know it, but as it was billions of years ago, a world warmed by a thicker atmosphere, where clouds gathered and released long rains upon plains the color of old embers. Rivers wound their way across the surface like living threads, pooling into inland seas and perhaps a northern ocean that stretched toward the horizon beneath a sky tinged with faint blues. The planet was not merely a sphere of iron and stone. It was sculpted by water, carved by time, alive with movement. Every channel, every delta, every layer of sediment tells us this was a place that once breathed. And in that world, wet, temperate, dynamic, it is not unreasonable to wonder what might have stirred beyond microbial life. On Earth, complex organisms rose in the wake of similar conditions. Civilizations, in our brief tenure, emerged swiftly once the stage was set. If Mars enjoyed hundreds of millions of years of stability, might something have risen beneath those once gentle skies? Not a mirror of us, perhaps, but a different intelligence, born of a different sun and soil, building in forms that time would later erase. The planet itself seems to keep its secrets close. Its crust is ancient, scarred by volcanoes that once towered taller than any mountain on Earth, and by impact craters so immense they span entire regions. If anything once stood upon those plains, cities, monuments, networks of structures, they would have been subjected to storms that rage across the globe, to freezing temperatures that crack stone, to cosmic radiation that scours away fragile traces. Over eons, landscapes shift. Dust buries. Memory fades. Even here on Earth, a single continent can swallow whole civilizations within a geological blink. Mars has had far longer. Standing at the rim of Valles Marineris, the great Martian chasm that cleaves the crust for thousands of kilometers, one might feel a strange pull, as though the canyon is less a wound than a page torn from some older, grander chronicle. Its walls rise and fall in formations that hint at symmetry, at layering, at shapes that almost suggest intent. Most of these patterns are easily explained by tectonics and erosion, but the human mind is drawn to the possibility that somewhere, beneath those cliffs and sands, the bones of a forgotten age may rest. This is not about certainties. It is about the tantalizing silence between them. Mars does not deny. It waits. And if such questions stir something in you, if the idea of a world that once knew itself, only to fall into endless quiet, pulls at the edges of your imagination, then stay with us. To understand what Mars might have once been, we must look past its current silence and learn to read the scars etched across its face. Unlike Earth, Mars lacks the slow churn of tectonic plates that recycles crust and swallows continents, which means its surface preserves an older record. Some of its plains date back more than 4 billion years, making them among the most ancient accessible surfaces in the solar system. When we look at Mars, we are not merely looking at another planet, we are looking into the deep past, at a landscape frozen in time. Billions of years ago, Mars was not the arid wasteland we know. Geological evidence paints the picture of a planet that once hosted long-lasting bodies of liquid water. Ancient river valleys snake across the terrain, converging into basins that may have been vast lakes or shallow seas. The northern lowlands, in particular, show signs that they might once have been an ocean, covering up to a third of the planet's surface. Minerals like clays and sulfates, which form in the presence of water, are abundant in certain layers, whispering of wet climates that persisted for millions of years. This was not a brief flash of habitability, it was an era measured in ages. The Martian atmosphere, though now thin and inhospitable, once seems to have been thick enough to support flowing water on the surface. Scientists suspect it was stripped away gradually, perhaps by the relentless solar wind after Mars lost its global magnetic field. With its atmosphere bleeding into space, the planet cooled, its oceans retreated, and deserts expanded. What remained was a skeletal world, its seas turned to ice, its winds scouring the plains where rivers once flowed. If anything had emerged in that warmer age, it would have faced a slow apocalypse, not a sudden cataclysm, but a steady fading of light and warmth. A civilization, if it existed, not annihilated in fire but slowly entombed in frost and sand. Our rovers and orbiters have uncovered features that, to some eyes, appear suggestive of artificiality. Patterns in Martian mesas, unusual geometric ridges, formations that, when captured in the right light, hint at angles and alignments that nature rarely favors. Most of these, of course, have sound geological explanations: differential erosion, collapsed lava tubes, the strange tricks light plays on fractured stone. And yet, the possibility lingers at the edges, persistent, unyielding. What if even one of these structures is not simply the product of wind and time, but the last remnant of something built, abandoned, and buried long before life on Earth rose from the oceans? The enigma deepens when we consider the anomalies scattered across the Martian surface. Hematite spheres, layered sedimentary outcrops, magnetized crust, and certain unexplained chemical signatures in the soil all tell fragments of a complex environmental story. None of these prove civilization, but neither do they rule out the faint possibility that Mars once fostered something capable of altering its world in ways not entirely unlike our own. On Earth, if we were to disappear, traces of our industries would fade within tens of thousands of years. In a few million, tectonics and erosion would erase almost all recognizable signs. Mars, with its slower geological clock, could preserve subtle fingerprints far longer, but not forever. The ceaseless sandstorms, radiation, and meteorite impacts would gradually blur even the most deliberate works. Some scientists have even entertained versions of this idea from unexpected angles. The concept of technosignatures is usually reserved for detecting alien civilizations on distant exoplanets, signals in atmospheres, anomalies in light spectra, or artificial compounds that shouldn't naturally occur. But in recent years, a handful of researchers have turned that lens inward, asking whether Mars itself might carry technosignatures of a bygone civilization. If such a society had existed millions or even billions of years ago, its traces would not be monuments but chemical and structural whispers, peculiar isotopic ratios, synthetic molecules locked in ancient strata, or modifications to local geology too systematic to be chance. And then there are the enigmas that refuse to fade from cultural memory. The so-called face on Mars, the strange, seemingly geometric mounds of Cydonia, the repeating hexagonal and triangular shapes glimpsed in orbital images. The scientific consensus explains them as natural formations, shaped by erosion and the tricks of lighting and resolution. Yet the very persistence of these images in the human imagination speaks to something deeper than conspiracy theories. It speaks to our instinct to search for patterns, to sense that a story might lie hidden beneath layers of dust, a story waiting to be read by those who know where to look. When we sift through this evidence, scientific and speculative alike, what emerges is not proof but possibility. Mars is a world that once had all the ingredients we associate with habitability: water, atmosphere, time, and geological diversity. If life arose there, as many astrobiologists believe it might have, then the question shifts from was there life to how far could it have gone before the planet turned to stone and silence. If the thought of ancient hands, or something like hands, shaping a world under alien skies draws you deeper, you're not alone. These are the questions that live between data and wonder, between the microscope and the myth. Stay with us, subscribe, and keep walking through the corridors of possibility as we explore what might have been before Mars became the silent world we see today. If we allow ourselves to follow the branching paths of speculation, the story of Mars unfolds like a tapestry with threads we can only faintly see. One path imagines a civilization born from water and rock during Mars's warmer ages. emerging slowly over countless millennia as the rivers carved their valleys. Perhaps it began in the shallow oceans of the northern lowlands, where life clustered along fertile shores beneath a pale, distant sun. In this vision, intelligence did not arrive suddenly, but grew with the rhythm of the planet, adapting to each geological heartbeat. Cities, if they existed, might have been built close to water, shaped from basalt or hardened clays, designed to blend with the land rather than dominate it. When the air thinned and the seas began to withdraw, such a civilization could have retreated underground, seeking warmth and protection in the honeycombed crust, leaving the surface to the cold and the storms. Another path leads us to imagine a culture that rose not in defiance of the changing climate, but in harmony with it. Perhaps these beings, whatever their form, anticipated the loss of atmosphere and prepared to transcend their dying world. They may have altered their environment deliberately, leaving technosignatures buried in the crust or embedded in atmospheric chemistry. Or perhaps they turned inward, evolving into forms no longer bound to the fragile ecosystem that birthed them. On Earth, our civilization clings to the thin shell of the biosphere. On Mars, survival may have meant letting go of the surface altogether. A third, stranger path imagines not a biological civilization, but one that was already post-biological by the time the planet began to fade. Intelligence might have emerged early and swiftly, harnessing energy and matter in ways we can barely imagine. Such a society could have built machines that outlived their makers, hidden in the Martian crust, dormant but enduring, waiting for the rare moment when another intelligence, ours, would finally arrive to awaken their silent archives. It may sound like fiction, but on geological timescales, our brief history as a species is no less fleeting, no less improbable. And then there is the most humbling possibility of all, that Mars did indeed harbor life, perhaps even intelligent life, but that it never reached a level where it could resist the planet's changing fate. It may have flourished briefly, building nothing, leaving no monuments, its existence as ephemeral as the rains that once fell. If so, its memory has long since been folded into stone, mingled with dust, dissolved into the thin air drifting above the plains. The story was real, but it left no storytellers behind. Whichever path we imagine, each leads us to the same haunting truth. Worlds change, civilizations, whether real or hypothetical, are fragile, and time is the great eraser. Mars is not merely a distant world, it is a mirror held up to our own. It shows us what a habitable planet looks like when its protective shields fail, when oceans retreat and skies thin. It is not hard to look at the silent dunes and wonder whether, one day, Earth too might resemble this place, a once living world reduced to whispers in the rock. Perhaps this is why the idea of a Martian civilization resonates so deeply. It is not only about what might have been, it is about what could be. If intelligence once bloomed on Mars and vanished, then the cosmos may be littered with such stories. Civilizations that rise in fragile pockets of time, shine briefly, and are then swept into silence. If Mars was home to one of these lost chapters, then we are not alone in the great cosmic story. We are simply latecomers, leafing through the last remaining pages of a book whose earlier chapters have been scorched, scattered, and buried beneath alien sands. As we send our machines to traverse Martian craters, to drill into its rocks, to taste its ancient soils, we are not just looking for life, we are listening for echoes. A single chemical anomaly, a buried structure, an inexplicable pattern in the crust could change our understanding of history forever. We would no longer be asking whether we are alone, but whether we are the first. If these questions stir your imagination, if you want to keep walking through these forgotten corridors of possibility, stay with us. Each step we take uncovers another layer of the unknown. Subscribe, and let us journey further into the silence of other worlds together. In the end, Mars may yield no evidence of a lost civilization. It may remain silent, its mysteries stubbornly locked in stone. But the act of searching changes us. It reminds us that civilizations, no matter how mighty, exist within fragile windows of time, and that the universe is far older than any story we've written. When we gaze at Mars, we are not simply looking at another planet. We are looking at the shadow of what may have been, and perhaps, in time, the reflection of what might become of us.